I want to give you a formal welcome and to thank you for joining us for this third event. We regret that Honoré Jeffers will not be with us tonight, but we're so pleased to have Frank X. Walker. My colleagues and I from the Department of English, Dr. Dana Williams, who's here with us tonight, Dr. Tony Medina and Dr. Maida Dua-Jones, who will be joining us shortly, are especially thankful for the generous donation from Dr. Reed V. and Marjorie Malone-Tuxon, which made the series possible. We value this opportunity to honor Howard legends Sterling Brown, Lucille Clifton, and Emery Baraka, whose literary lives and activist work furthered Black art and Black consciousness at Howard and across the country. In the spirit of these three venerated poets who served as mentors for communities of poets, including those who read during the first 2 weeks of the series, we invite two Howard students and emerging young poets each to share one poem. First, I'll invite Miss Maquila Jones, who is a 21-year-old student here at Howard, majoring in civil engineering. She's from Mobile, Alabama, and she plans to go to grad school to focus on structural engineering, and a poet as well. And so we'll welcome her to the lectern to share one of her poems.
Hello everyone, can y'all hear me? Okay. Well, this poem, we had to basically write a poem about a color and describe it, so I'll see if you can guess what color I'm describing after the poem. It is a boat out at sea after the sun rotates to the other side of the world and left you with no flashlight. And the water looks like a huge open mouth ready to swallow you. It could be seen as peaceful as an open country meadow with nothing but moonlight. It is darker than the cover you hide under when the monster comes out at night. Deceptive enough to create optical illusions with curves. When the cloud can't bear the weight of the heaven's tears, they thicken while the sky becomes eerie, exploding with claps of thunder and shocks of lightning. It's the color of the pavement, and the boy who is killed that lays flat on the pavement while the red blood spills. It's the color of the hand that held the gun that killed the boy that lays on the pavement with its red blood spill polluting the ground, only to be washed away by tears of heaven and later forgotten by the news. It's the color of the flowers that decorate the door of the mourning mother. It's the color of the capsule that holds the mortal body until it's put in that dark hole.
Thank you so much. And thanks to Dr. Tony Medina for encouraging this young lady to participate. Our second student is Angel C. Dye. She was one of my students last year.
Is there something else playing? I hear music. I don't think it's no driving.
Oh,
That's great.
it's in the gallery here, yeah. I was so pleased to have Angel in my freshman writing class last year. She's an undergraduate student here with a concentration in creative writing, English. She is the only child of a single mother, and she originates from Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas, by way of Milwaukee. Angel fell in love with the art of the written and spoken word at the age of 10, and she began writing short stories and poetry then. She's competed in local and national poetry competitions and was published in Teen Ink magazine. Please welcome Angel.
Hello, everyone. Dr. Kalu requested that I do a piece from my first published collection called Rhyme or Reason, so I'm going to do a short poem called Scholarship. This was really inspired by my freshman year, just breaking into adulthood and new experiences, new people. Numb poems. I write numb poems for late, dark, blurred nights, words slurred, thick herb clouds swirling small dorm rooms, stupid kissing behind closed doors. That is not your boyfriend. They'll label you a whore by morning. I hope I can remember the answers to that test. Life is my worst subject. Adulthood is the universal university we all enroll in full time but often neglect. I overslept right through my wisdom credit. Help. I am just numb, not dumb. Help me get my grown-up scholarship back. Thank you.
Thank you, Angel. Thank you all again. And I will introduce our guest speaker for tonight. The youngest and the first Black writer to be named Kentucky Poet Laureate, Frank X. Walker has produced, among other works, 6 collections of poetry, which have garnered numerous awards, including a Lannan Poetry Fellowship, the Lillian Smith Book Award for Buffalo Dance, The Journey of York, and more recently, a 2014 NAACP Image Award for his latest collection, Turn Me Loose, The Unghosting of Medgar Evers. In her review of Appalachia, Frank X. Walker's first book of poems, Nikki Finney rightly stated that, quote, any portrait of land worth its salt must also include a landscape of its people worth its weight in blood, sweat, and tears. Appalachia by Frank X. Walker is such an almanac of human geography. Indeed, Walker's debut collection named and helped to define a region and its people. Nikki Finney's poem, The Mapmaker, which is dedicated to Walker, declares, we sent for a man with hands, a carver, a stone cutter, a chiseler, someone to dig through all the distortions, to etch us right, someone to bring us out of all the wood grains there are, and finally be all our living colors. A carver, indeed. Walker originated the term Appalachia and co-founded the Appalachian Poets. He claims the responsibility of, quote, challenging the notion of a homogeneous, all-white literary landscape in the Appalachian region. He has described Appalachia as a worldview, a way of thinking and being in the diaspora. This is precisely one of the reasons I was so drawn to his first book when I read it as a graduate student long ago in 2001. Appalachia, as both a place and, quote, a movement of cultural awareness, as noted by Ricardo Nazario y Colon, reaches across time and space in such a way that I was easily able to see my rural Jamaican upbringing in the cultural landscape of the bluegrass. Quote, some of the bluegrass is black, reads a line from Walker's eponymous poem, which also speaks of, quote, an almost heroic notion of family and porches. Walker's innovative and acclaimed poetry has created new pathways to defining and reshaping identity and belonging. My own scholarship focuses on the ways Walker's poetry, in both form and content, evinces new and truthful representations of Black womanhood, which abandons those ideas shaped by the hegemonic structure. Even more striking is his dedication to challenging and obliterating whitewashed histories in a bold effort to situate the stories of Black life in their rightful place as the main artery of the U.S.-American narrative. Walker's wide-ranging work as visual artist, filmmaker, writer, activist, and teacher reveals that he is driven by the same impulse that informed Brown, Clifton, and Baraka's lives. Like Sterling Brown, who proclaimed in Haile Garima's documentary After Winter, I'm a minor poet and a major teacher. Walker affirms that his most important role is that of teacher. He is currently full professor at the University of Kentucky, where, as a young undergraduate, he opened a visit and reading by Amiri Baraka with poems of his own. Walker is firmly rooted in the tradition, as it were. He bears and carries the legacies of the poets we honor here today. In fact, he has noted that reading Lucille Clifton's The Son of Medgar in her collection, The Terrible Stories, compelled him to write Turn Me Loose, The Unghosting of Medgar Evers, a book imbued with rich and powerful language as it bears witness. I'm so honored to present a writer whose work I've had the privilege of reading and researching for well over a decade. Won't you join me in welcoming Frank X. Walker?
Some introductions just just make you feel the gray hairs just popping out of your face. Thank you for that generous intro. I can't possibly live up to it, but look at the crowd first. Hey, Kimberly. It's good to be anywhere people gather for poetry and are willing to stand. I think these are 3 empty seats, or maybe 4 empty seats, if you guys don't mind coming and grabbing them. I think there's a seat right here. There's plenty of seats, so we'll pretend like it's one of those planes and it's going to be a decent ride. But if you want seats, they're right here. I promise I won't bite, unless you plan to sneak out early, which in case stand by the door. One of the reasons I wanted to read here was when I think about, I don't know how many years ago, but forever ago, I was at this place called Furious Flower, and I wandered into a hotel lobby, and there was a young scholar, poet, holding 100 people hostage, it seemed. It was Tony Medina. And that, I had never met him, I'd only heard about the legend that he had already become. And there's something about that evening that really wanted me to figure out how I could connect Kentucky with what was happening on the East Coast. Between, you guys have an advantage here in DC and up to Philly and Boston and New York. But in Kentucky, we always felt like we were locked away from this kind of activity. And if we get a reading this size, it won't look like this audience. So it was extra special to be anywhere he was going to be. And since then, because of CLA and Spalding, I keep seeing these familiar faces, and I'm starting to feel like there is a national community that Kentucky poets belong to. So I'm happy to be part of that. I'm going to read some poems that are published and some unpublished ones. And I won't go too long because my grandson is sitting on the front row. And he's been here on campus all day with me, and he's giving me the side eye, so I can't go on too long. But thank you for coming, and thank all of you for being part of this series.
Did they mention that you got the NAACP award for the book?
Maybe. Yeah.
Let's get a round of applause for that.
But thank you, Tony. And I always count on him for backup. In honor of who this series is grounded on, I'm going to read a poem. I think in honor of all of those great names, but specifically for Amiri Baraka, because it makes it feel like a nice round circle. And I want to open this poem with a quote from Dr. Eleanor Traylor, which says, Amiri Baraka is an event in the language that advances theories of consciousness. This is called After You Kick Your Jones, or Amiri Baraka. You drove your stanzas like a man driving wild horses, except you weren't plowing a field. You were digging us up from our dead selves. Your fiery tongue, a whip that sizzled and cracked, that took a swing at the head of imperialists plotting against our blackness, against our beauty. You went for the head of everything with canine teeth, introducing itself as master, even if it carried a cross, even if it looked like us. You upright bass, you brass instrument, you blue note. When you open your mouth and hands, whole horn sections and truth-telling old men made you their echo chamber, their juke joint, their bandstand. You never stood at the podium alone, never separated yourself from our history, from the poor, from oppressed people, anywhere. And you are not alone now. And you are not just anywhere. Now it's you and Hannibal, you, the Mau Mau and Bessie, you, Shaka and Coltrane, you, Robeson and Diz and Fannie Lou, you and Harriet and Nelson, you, Nat and Biko and Miles, you and Toussaint and Billy, you and Medgar, you and Malcolm, you and us, always us and you and us, always us. Amiri Baraka. One of the things that I learned reading and listening to a voice, a planet like Mary Baraka, was how important it is to not separate what's happening today from our history. And one of the things I'm struggling with is a new set of poems that deal with all the pain and ugliness that is part of the Middle Passage and slavery, and trying to bring that forward to a place that's warm enough to be considered love poems. So I'm going to read 2 poems from that experimental series that may qualify as science fiction, but I don't know if there's such a thing as science fiction poetry yet. But here's the first of 2. It's called Recipe for Seafood. Ingredients: millions of stolen Africans, partially clothed and chained, tight packed, wombs full of eggs, uninvited man seed soaked in rum, vats of cold porridge, no saltpeter, decorum, or respect. 1/4 ocean of African sea salt, a whole ocean across. Directions: preheat hull to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Lightly grease a 2 times 5 foot wooden baking plank with excrement. Gather captives in small groups. Make them dance on a rocking deck. Beat, drench with cold water, stare, lust, rape, salt, repeat. Teach them to jump rope with a cat o' nine tails. Rape, starve, stuff with cold porridge. Stomp out resistance 1 head at a time. Brand, drink, laugh, break, brag. Toss what remains into the sea. Slow bake in an oven for 2.5 months, or until a toothpick inserted into the center of her bread comes out clean. This is the second part. What I want to remember. What I want to remember is not the sea salt from the cold, cold baths that turn our bruises to screams, but the salt in the ocean, cresting and falling down your cheeks, sorrow tributaries to the river between twin breasts, filling the drinking gourd around your navel and the wading pool in the small of your back. What I want to remember is not how they broke us 1 at a time, but what resistance sounds like when air is sucked through teeth, how it looks in the right eyes. What I want to remember is not how long I couldn't touch you, but how I long to, and how I long to now. So that's just a piece of that. I'm going to jump forward and share some personal poems that deal with, most small and large families have their share or a certain percentage of dysfunction. I'm one of 10 kids, and because those numbers, maybe it's not disproportionate, but 3 of my siblings are addicts and have done some hard time, and their choices have affected the entire family. And I've been working on a series of poems that deal with their choices and their effects on the whole family. And this first one is for English majors out there, in case you had to suffer through Moby Dick. This is called Don't Call Me Ishmael. Hard time didn't make brother wiser like it did Ether's night. He returned home from prison with a pocket full of excuses, not poems. You thought he'd read Moby Dick while on lockdown, the way he chased his great whites. Each encounter separating him like Ahab from his leg, first from his own children, and eventually from himself. Regret is for families forgiving enough to break their own promises, not realizing that even if the harpoon is made of love, it can still drag the whole boat down with the whale. We might have understood revenge and even obsession, but addiction is more unforgiving than the sea. My brother was a paratrooper, and he came back from his tour of duty. We think he was already addicted to something, but part of his addiction had to do with height. You know, he became a roofer. So it was an easy metaphor. Just think about him always trying to be high. So this is called paratrooper. When brother comes down from a high, he moves like a ghost trapped on the ground. His thin frame weathered from the effects of bad habits, eyes nervous and searching. When I catch him standing on the edge of the porch, coffee cup cradled in his hand like a loaded gun, cigarette parked in his lips, I wonder if he's hunting for his former self, the one who jumped out of the back of planes instead of arms. Watching him crown himself with smoke, I remember how quickly he turned to roofing after his tour. Searching for that high became the only familiar thing he knew. Life looked simpler that far off the ground. When I look at him standing on the edge of the porch, I wonder if he is looking down at small towns and cities, or choices, some of them still smoking, or simply regretting that the roof was never quite high enough. One of the things about having a relative with challenges is trying to figure out how much to support them. And you hear about how our choices and non-choices influence their choices. But my brother always said that he wanted to be the opposite of whatever I was. I was older. I loved school, so he felt like he had to hate school. I was the athlete, so he hated sports. But somewhere in there, he convinced me that I was partially responsible for his choices. So this poem tries to deal with that. It's called Domesticated. He is methodical and patient until his hunger kicks in. Then he is relentless, extremely driven, obstinate, and most always successful. I marvel at his resourcefulness, his improvisational skills, his ability to quiet the cold, pain, distance, rules, locks, family duties and obligations. I envy that. I want to be that hungry in search of a poem. He is an architect of dreams. I am simply a construction worker with words. We both get up every day in search of something to open us up, something dark and lonely, something worth excavating, something that might free us both. He is a self-taught artist, part hyena, coyote, and wolf. I am simply the Academy's pet dog. Yeah, it be that way sometimes. This is and his, if you know an addict, if it's possible to be high at a right time, I don't know that there is, but he was always high at the wrong time. And in this, you hear that at the end of this poem. This is called He Was a Bad Mother, Hush Your Mouth. Brother wanted to be like his daddy, wanted to sing solos on Sundays, wanted to scream into the microphone, wanted to make the congregation moan, urged on by a diamond-studded bishop who rode around town in a white Cadillac with hair prettier than James Brown's. He learned to rooster strut and entertain down in front of the pulpit, nicknamed himself Pretty, and believed it. Had a ring for every finger and a closet full of neon suits, matching shoes and belts. In his yearbook photo, he wore a Reynolds wrap around his front teeth, a tribute to his daddy's gold grin. He floated into church, draped in costume jewelry, hairstyled in helicopter blades, hovering so far off the ground, he forgot it was our mother's funeral. I let that one soak in. One of the challenges is he had a son. He was named after him, and I think we raised that son. And then some time ago, I guess officially 6 years ago, that son was about to become a father and had just found out that it was going to be a boy. And he was panicking about wondering how much DNA was being passed through. So this is called Expectant Father Manifesto. Dear Jerome, I recognize that look in your eye. All either of us ever got was their names. And I know it's hard not to, but I want to tell you not to hate yours. Instead, let us love the children we invite into this world. Let us give them all the hugs they deserve and get from them the ones we may have missed. Let us be there to watch each first tooth and step, hear each first laugh and word, to bear witness, to mark each milestone. Remember that our fathers are who they are, and we are only their names, not their bad habits, not their wrong choices. If your child is a son, give him more than your name. Give him a life with you. All right, that's all you get for the personal stuff. I'm gonna jump into some of these historical poems. How are we doing on time?
You're doing good.
You good? Okay. One of the things that people connected with is a genre of poetry that would be called historical poetry. And if you go to the bookstore or your library and ask for the historical poetry section, they're gonna look at you like you're crazy. But believe me, they are out there. And this first one is an example of that. And I think what we're trying to do collectively is to take a second look at history, our collective history, and tell the other side of the story, the parts that have been left out, the parts that have been misrepresented. And one of the things that I took on as a challenge growing up in Kentucky and learning about the Lewis and Clark expedition was trying to understand why I had learned that it was just Lewis and Clark, two super men, not 42 people, not a 15-year-old Native American girl, woman, and her 3-month-old son, not an African American manservant named York. I never heard those parts of the story. This first book tries to retell that expedition from the point of view of the manservant York. And I'm going to read a few poems from this first collection in his voice. I'm going to ask you to do me a favor, because these poems are set in 1803 through 06 for the most part. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes on this first poem and try to imagine that it's not me that you hear, that you're listening to a man who's so large, physically he resembles an NFL defensive lineman, right? And his features are very African, very dark, broad nose, big lips, hulking muscles, but he's so nimble that all the journals talk about how the Native Americans marveled at how well he moved, how fast he moved when he was encouraged to dance for their entertainment. The thing about this opening poem is that York is trying to deal with his illiteracy. That there are 5 people on the expedition that every night they sit and they write down details of what's been happening. They draw maps, They draw pictures of animals and plants. And he's wishing he could do the same thing, but he can't because he's not literate. So he's trying to memorize things in such detail that when he returns home 3 years later, he'll be able to tell the story. So he will reference his wife here and some other things. So if you close your eyes, I'll read Wind Talker. If I can make my words dress their naked selves in blackberry juice, lay down on a piece of bark, sheep or onion skin like massa do, if I could send a letter home to my wife, floated in the wind on wings or water, I'd tell her about Katanka and all the wide and high places this side of the big river, how his family, numbering 3 for every star in the sky, look like a forest when they graze together, turn into the muddy Missouri when they thunder along, faster than any horse, making the grass lay down long after the quiet has returned. How they don't so much as raise a tail when I come round with my woolly head and tobacco skin, like I'm one of them, making the Arikara and Mandan think me big medicine, Katanka who walk like man. Today, we stood on the edge of all this, looked out at so much water, the mountains we crossed to get here seem a little smaller. As I watch fish the size of cabins dance in the air and splash back in the water like children playing, I think about her and if we gon' ever be free. Then I close my eyes and pray that I don't live long enough to see Massa make this ugly too. So that's how it opens. And because the landscape is so important in the story, there are several pieces that deal primarily with landscape as a character. And please come in, there are empty seats. Just grab one. Don't feel pressured. I'll read 2 more from this early section. This is called God's House. When we first left Kentucky, the trees had commenced dressing up the fall harvest, and the garden was already full of pumpkins and squash. Master Clark didn't ask me to go on no expedition. He just said, pack, and pointed to the door. So I gathered up what little I got, and more than I carried his, and head off to a sail-bearing keel boat where his friend, Master Lewis, is waiting. That boat was so big, you could lay any 10 of the 16 men on board, or 8 of me, head to toe, and still have enough room for the dog. We start out on the Ohio and swing up the Old Man of Rivers. When we get to the mouth of the dark woman they calls the Big Muddy, we sets up winter camp, a good canoe ride from St. Louis. That spring, when the rains come, we cross the Mississippi and commence to climb the Missouri and float right up through heaven on earth. More sky than I ever seen, rocks as pretty as trees, and game so plentiful they come right down to the riverbank and invites themselves to dinner. Now, I ain't what you would call a scripture quoter, but the first time I seen the waterfall at Missouri, felt a herd of buffalo stampede, and looked down from the top of Rock Mountains, it was like church. And where else but God's house can a body servant big as me carry a rifle, a hatchet, and a bone-handled knife so sharp it can peel the black off a lump of coal, and the white man still close his eyes and feel safe at night. And this next poem deals directly with his sense of powerlessness, this relationship between literacy and power. It's called Primer. The only book we allowed to know is the Bible. Though many a slave been sold south, had fingers chopped off, and worse, for the crime of reading and writing, I figures my respect for a good telling come from listening to old York weave his magic at night. Folk hung from my porch like baby possums and lived off the breath he give to every word, no matter how many times they tasted the tale. I learned to appreciate the power of single words, holding a lamp over Master Clark while he studied his brother's letters and struggled with his own returns. Them think all slaves dumb, 'cause we can't cipher. But they'd be surprised how many words we pick up just standing around like trees in a room full of educated men. And I think one of the more powerful sub-themes inside this story is the relation between York and his wife and what happened inside those marriages inside the institution of slavery. It's hinted at in this poem called Sundays and Christmas. This is York still talking. I cares plenty for my wife, but I've been told a slave can't truly know love, being its master, and white men in general have and takes certain privileges with our women. I suspect the deepest hurt in the world be to risk being tied to a woman's hearth than standing on the front porch while the master part her thighs, knowing that any cry raised is inviting death or worse. But what else but love make you hold that woman even tighter, try to rock her back to whole long after the tears dry up and the hurt turns the ashes back to flames? It be at nighttime and deep into winter. I can think of no other breath I wish to feel, and no other whisper I ache to hear. What we loud to feel might not rate as love, but it be powerful enough to make you rule the time between visits. So that's kind of the depth of what the first book tries to do, and it's all in York's voice. And then there's a sequel, believe it or not, to the story that tries to continue the story, but in the voices of mostly women and female voices, including the voice of the river and Native American female shaman. And it turns out York's Native American wife, while he was with the Nez Perce, he took a bride who happened to be the daughter of the chief. And for the sake of time, I'm gonna skip forward past the poems that would singe the young ears in the room, and say that when York returned from this 3-year expedition, because he and his wife had a special relationship, she knew immediately that he had been with other women. And so this is them trying to negotiate this new space. He's been gone for three years, now he's back. This is what she has to say in the beginning. This is in Slave Wife. It's called Say My Name. Folks around here want to call me Auntie, York's old wife, or Master So-and-so's nigger wench, like I ain't got a name of my own. Them don't know how hard it is to put aside a little piece of myself that nobody never touched but me. A piece big enough to wrestle the long, hard days and keep itself warm at night without a man around. Them don't know what it's like to stand in the dark, night after night, wrapped in that buffalo robe he sent. Look up at the stars and wonder which ones are looking down on him. And believe that something bad happened to him out there, that I would feel it too. When he come home, I don't need him to say he loved me. I don't need him to bring me gifts. I just want him to hold me close, make like he glad to see me, bend down to my ear and whisper my name. And then, once it gets past, all the reunion, this is a poem called Unwelcome Guest. I don't think York knows I could see her too. The first time was in the corner of his eye, while he looked far off but stared at the plate right in front of him. He didn't say nothing about her, but the way his lips turned up at the ends said plenty. Now I ain't one to sass, his growl helped me to know a slave woman's place. So I sits up all night with both my hands and ears open, waiting to catch her name on his lips. After that, no matter how much he talked of grizzlies, buffaloes, big fish, mountains or oceans, she become all I can see, all I wants to know. It gets so crowded in our little place, I swears I can almost smell her. And by then, I knows one of us will have to go. Now she just can't take it to the divorce court. But she is not without means. This is a poem I'll leave you with in this section called The Sunflower Seed Oil Conjure. First, I get some fresh well water and put it on to boil. Stirs up a tea brewed from apricot vine, rattlesnake weed, and plenty of honey. Then I sets him down between my knees and with a wooden tooth comb left to me by my mama's mama commenced to scratching at his scalp till his shoulders looked covered with snow. Then I fills up my wash tub with boiling water doctored with peppermint root and sets to scrubbing him slow enough for the heat to open his doors. When his body is clean, I starts back to work on his head, busting up a mean suds and using my fingers to walk up and down his scalp till he let loose a low moan and his eyes start to roll around in his head. After I rinses and twist all the force out, I starts back in with warm sunflower seed oil. Only this time, every finger makes its own little circle while both my hands make bigger ones. And they follows each other from the stiff tree limbs in the back of his neck, across his crown to his soft spot, while my thumbs dig in slow and deep where the headaches come on. I pours the extra oil into my hands and rub his neck and shoulders down to his ribs and arms. Then, like a turtle dance, I moves back up again. I work slow and hard, and after a while, when I gets all the way to his man sack, he opens his eyes and be glad it's me. You know it's gonna cost him something. All right, now, I'm gonna close with two poems that give the book its title, When Winter Comes, and it's York and then his enslaved wife both commenting on, I think, the emotional challenges of trying to sustain a marriage inside the institution of slavery. This is him speaking. It's called To Have and to Hold. It do more harm than good to be enslaved and agree to love forever, when there be folks over us with even more power than death to do us part. Being another man's property, all I can promise is when we in the same quarters, no one would hold you closer or with more tenderness than me. If ever I have to choose between another day of service and death, I will always choose living. Even if Massa sell me down the Mississippi tomorrow or pair me up with another woman to breed, I will only think on what we had and chase away thoughts of what we had not. I aims to see you every Sunday and Christmas. But if ever I'm away more than 2 whole seasons without sending back word, untie the ribbons from that broom we jump, mourn for me but a little, then set your mind to figuring on how you gonna stay warm when winter comes. And this is her response. It's called Real Cost. Somewhere out there, he learned to touch me like I'm a woman. And not just some woman, me. In our marriage bed, he seemed as interested in pleasing me as he be in spilling himself. I knew he'd come back changed when new words fall out his mouth like love and freedom and manhood. And there come a look like he owned all three, free and clear, and didn't need no papers to prove it. But it scared me, because I seen that look in many a black eye before white hammers nailed it shut or left it frozen open and swinging, to teach the rest what anything that smell like courage cost. I have no doubt he'd give his life to stay with me. So I don't tell him that Massa taking me back down south. I just kiss him soft to sleep and stare at him long enough to call up his face when I gets old and thankful he still be breathing somewhere when winter comes. That's New York City. This guitar run out. Let's go. It's just here for class credit. I'm gonna close with a. How much time do I have? I'm gonna close with a handful of poems from Turn Me Loose, The Young Ghosting of Medgar Evers. I'm gonna assume you all know who Medgar Evers is, so I'm gonna give you the tutorial. But the voices you may not be familiar with. Medgar was assassinated by a man named Byron de la Beckwith. And de la Beckwith's voice is the opening speaker in this collection. And de la Beckwith was married twice, and his two wives, Thelma and Willie de la Beckwith, first and second wife, are also primary speakers. And the other dominant speaker is Merle Evers, the widow. And the voice you don't hear from beyond the title of the book is Medgar. And that's part of how he remains a ghost. But everything is about him. And one of the things that I want to share is just how, not just how difficult it was to write the book, but how important it is that if you pick this up, that you don't read the first part of it and then put it down, because it is dark in the beginning. It is a difficult read in the beginning, but to me it was important that in case you didn't know or didn't experience or have no idea that this part of our history exists, that you at least can read about these kind of details, so that at the very end, when Merle Evers is able to say, "I forgive the man who killed my husband," you understand how long a road that is for her. That she didn't just wake up and say, "Oh, I feel different today." That she struggled with that. She hated too. She hated back. And I want you to appreciate the depth to which this man hated. I'm going to read an opening poem in his voice that opens with an epigraph that was used against him in the third trial. You know, he was tried 3 times, and he was in his 80s by the time he went to prison finally. He lived his whole adult life as a free man. But he said, according to an FBI undercover agent for the Klan, that Byron openly bragged about having said this, that killing that nigger gave me no more inner discomfort than our wives endure when they give birth to our children. After birth, Byron de la Beckwith. Like them, a man can conceive an idea, an event, a moment so clearly he can name it, even before it breathes. We both can carry the thing around inside for only so long, and no matter how small it starts out, it can swell and get so heavy our backs hurt, and we can't find comfort enough to sleep at night. All we can think about is the relief that waits at the end. When it was finally time, it was painless. It was the most natural thing I'd ever done. I just closed my eyes and squeezed, then opened them, and there he was, just laying there, still covered with blood, but already trying to crawl. I must admit, like any proud parent, I was afraid at first, afraid he'd live, afraid he'd die too soon. Funny how life and death is a whole lot of pushing and pulling, holding and seeking breath, a whole world turned upside down until somebody screams. So you hear that darkness in his voice. I'm going to skip forward because we have this particular generation in the room. I want you to hear Byron's explanation behind the N-word, and then Charles Evers defend why not to use it. Byron de la Beckwith, humor me. I was raised with the word nigger in my mouth. In this part of the South, it is considered our silver spoon. It practically lived in every good joke I heard growing up in Mississippi. The only other good ones were about sex. But I've seen bad jokes about niggers and sex kick all the power of whiskey right off the front porch. turn it into something so mean, somebody would have to get smacked around to stir that power back up again. Sometimes it was a dog too friendly for drunks. Sometimes it was a girlfriend or a wife who wandered grinning into our man talk and snickered at all the wrong parts. There weren't no women or dogs around. Us men would pile into a truck and ride off towards the coon side of town, looking for something funny. Charles Evers, the N-word. Charles is Meg's brother, by the way. Hearing that word launched from the back of any throat brings back the smell of German Shepherd breath, of fresh gasoline and sulfur air, of fear, both ours and theirs. I hear 9 brave children walking the gauntlet of hate in Little Rock, and 4 innocent little girls lifted up to heaven too soon. Instead of a rebel yell, I hear a rifle bark. Instead of a whiskey-soaked yeehaw, I hear a window break and children sobbing for a father face down in the pool of blood. I hear all my faith collapse on the wings of a woman's scream. I can't hear anything less and absolutely nothing funny. So that's my commercial. One of the things about the South is really appreciating maybe why football is so big in the South. Because if you think about football, then you have to think about pep rallies. If you think about pep rallies and all that energy and anger towards the other team wearing the wrong color, imagine that same thing before there was any such thing as football. Southern sports, Byron de Lebecker. Sometimes it starts with a bonfire or begins with taunting and spitting, quickly graduating to cursing and punching and kicking somebody as hard as you can for the sheer joy of causing pain, as entertainment for the crowd, now celebrating the crack or pop of broken bodies, showering outstanding individual violence with applause and cheers. All you need is somebody wearing the color you've been taught to hate, somebody threatening to take what's rightfully yours, and a little girl with her thighs exposed, held high in the air and screaming. One of the things I struggled with was trying to figure out how complicit. This man was a self-professed monster, but women, at least 2 women, loved him enough to marry him. What does it say about them? This is a poem called Fireproof, in the voice of his first wife, Willie de Lebecker. I'm going to follow that with a poem by Merle Evers, and I want you to listen for language that's the same in both poems. And this is 2 different women who love their husbands, 2 very different husbands. Fireproof, Willie de Lebecker. He would come home from evening rallies and secret meetings, so in love with me, I could never see nothing wrong with what he did with his hands. I just pretended I didn't know what gunpowder smelled like, or why he kept his rifle so clean. If he walked in the door and said, "Willie, burn these clothes," I'd pile them on the coals and stare at the fire. I'd listen to the music twixt the crackle and calm as we danced. And while the ashes gathered around their own kind in the bottom of the grate, I'd watch the embers glow like our bedroom did. Now, I ain't saying he was right or wrong. He often confused hatred with desire. But if you ain't never set a man on fire, felt him explode inside you, then die in your arms, honey, you got no idea what I'm talking about. And this is Merle's response. Listening to music. The right song, slow dancing through the air at the end of a long day full of kids and no husband, could not only set the tone, but put the sound of yesterday back in the air. Smokey Robinson and the Miracles crooned all the sweet words that his eyes whispered across the door frame when he finally came home. But more often than not, it was Sam Cooke and Ray Charles or Bobby Blue Bland taking turns in my ears, reminding me how much I loved that man. No matter how mad or lonely I might have felt, the right song was like a Kodak brownie of us cuddling, or an atlas mapping out all of our rough spots and the ways around them. After sweet-talking him out of his suit and tie, after he unloaded the day's burdens, we melted together in the dark beneath the covers and the crackle of the radio. The sound of my guys singing backup and Mega's Jackhammer Heart finally slowing to match our leaky faucet. As he fell asleep in my arms, completing the soundtrack for a perfect night. And we skip towards the end. This is Merrily Again in an Imagine addressed to both of the wives. It's called Sorority Meeting. My faith urges me to love you. My stomach begs me to not. All I know is that day made us sisters somehow. After long, nervous nights and trials on end, we are bound together in this unholy sorority of misery. I think about you every time I run my hands across the echoes in the hollows of my sheets. They seem loudest just before I wake. I open my eyes every morning, half expecting Mega to be there. Then I think about you, and your eyes always snatch me back. Your eyes won't let me forget. We are sorority sisters now, with a gut-wrenching country ballad for a sweetheart song, tired funeral and courtroom clothes for colors and secrets we will take to our graves. I was forced to sleep night after night after night with the ghost. You chose to sleep with the killer. We all pledged our love, crossed our hearts, and swallowed oaths before being initiated with a bullet. This next poem is in the voice of the bullet. The details are taken from the court transcripts. It's called 1/3 of 180 grams of lead, which is what the bullet fragment weighed after it passed through his body and went into the house. Both of them were history, even before one pulled the trigger. Before I rocketed through the smoking barrel hidden in the honeysuckle. Before I tore through a man's back, shattered his family, a window, and tore through an inner wall. Before I bounced off a refrigerator and a coffee pot. Before I landed at my destined point in history next to a watermelon. What was cruel was the irony, not the melon, not the man falling in slow motion, but the man squinting through the crosshairs, reducing the justice system to a small circle, praying that he not miss, then sending me to deliver a message, as if the woman screaming in the dark or the children crying at her feet could ever believe a bullet was small enough to hate. I told you these would be difficult. You guys all right?
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to shift gears just a little bit. It won't get much warmer because it's true. But you might find some humor in this. This poem comes with a challenge. It asks you to decide if these two voices are polarized because of race or because of class. See if you can tell the difference. One Mississippi, two Mississippi. You got old plantations, we got shotgun houses. You got sprawling verandas, we got a piece of front porch. You got beautiful gardens, we got cotton fields. You got Ole Miss Law School, we got Parchman Prison. You got Gulf Shore beaches, we got riverbanks. You got debutante balls, we got juke joints. You got bridge parties, we got dominoes and spades. You got mint juleps, we got homemade hoops. You got your grandmother's china, we got paper plates. You see a proud history, we see a racist past. You don't remember lynchings, we can't forget. You got blacks, we got the blues. And I'll close with two more. And what I want to say in the way of introducing this next and last poem is that one of the amazing things that happened, and there's a photograph that supports this, is that for the third trial, they exhumed Medgar's body. And his son, who didn't remember his father at all, from being so small when he was killed, was present when they pried the lid off the casket. And on that particular day, the son was the exact same age as his father was when he was assassinated. And if you look at the picture, they look like identical twins. So it's really, really spooky. So I tried to imagine what it must have been like for Merle to watch this kid turn into this man that she was married to. And if that happens in your houses, it happened in my house, and I didn't know about it for 10 years. Like, my parents were divorced when I was 4, but my mother would look at me sometimes and say, "Stop that." I didn't know what she was talking about, so I spent some time with my father when I was 17, and the thing with his lip is the same thing that I do, and my brother does, and my cousin does. It's this DNA, same with the receding hairline. We got the same stuff. So I imagine that this happened in her house. So this is called Gift of Time. Merle Everest. When I was able to see beauty in a world littered with scars, when I discovered stores of memories that a bullet couldn't quit, when I watched the sun grow into his father's face, his laugh, his walk, I saw how faith could be restored, and was finally able to imagine that before he fell in love with guns, before he lost his mother and his childhood, before he needed a reason to hate, to feel threatened, to push back against imaginary walls, collapsing in on him like August heat and no fan, I imagine before all that, little Byron was good. He was clean. He was innocent. And I finally understood that trouble don't last always. And the final poem in this collection is a poem called Heavy Weight, W-A-I-T. If Mississippi is to love her elephant self, she needs a memory as sharp as her ivory tusk, with as many wrinkles as her thick, thick past. If she forgets, she need only to reach back, caress her keloid skin, and run her fingers across the braille history raised on her spine, or the bruised couplets around her supple neck. For Mississippi to love her elephant self, she need only to open her blue-gray eyes and move. Move as if she carries the entire weight of history and southern guilt on her massive head. Move in any direction as long as it is forward. For Mississippi to love her elephant self, she must ask for, extend, and receive forgiveness, but she must never, ever, ever forget. Thank you.
One more poem.
Ah.
It's just the Emmett Till poem, the recipe.
The recipe?
Yeah, interesting. It's short. That's all.
All right.
Thank you.
Encore, encore.
It's one poem.
Thank you, fan. Well, the thing about this poem is that on the page, it's split into 2 columns, and it represents what happens in 2 different communities. And you see it, it's hinged together by words that are in common. But imagine you're in Money, Mississippi in, let's say, 1955. Those of you who cook might recognize this first column. Pick up a tool and beat white eggs, white sugar, dark corn syrup, vanilla extract, salt, and butter. Pour into a thin crust, cover with pecans, bake. Let things cool, ready when brown and puffy. May I recognize that? It's a pecan pie recipe. That's one community. Listen for the words in common and what the other community is thinking about. Pick up any nigga looking at white women or anything white but cotton. Wait until after dark. Extract a confession at gunpoint. Salt open wounds. Pour into the Tallahatchie River. Cover up the truth with a 75-pound cotton gin fan. Let things cool, ready when brown and puffy. A little different. That's the Emmett Till story, if you didn't know. That's a part of the, you know.
Yeah, we have a few minutes for question and answer. So we'll just open it up.
And a very few, because my grandson's students. He's ready to go. Yes.
What does it require of you to write your historical poem? The one about the collection on York is just excellent.
Thank you. Research. You know, I think if there's a formula, I would say it's memory, research, and imagination. And whatever you reach for memory first. You know, I was not alive in 1803, so all I can remember was what I learned about the Lewis and Clark expedition. There was a lot of research that included several trips out west, retracing the trail. My son and I, we spent a total of 5 weeks on the Nez Perce Reservation as part of the research, including experiencing the sweat lodge, a real sweat lodge, which meant that my son walked down to the river and saw these naked grown men. It was like, no. I don't know what this is, but I'm not going. He was 14 years old, and the elders actually met and allowed him to go in with his boxers on. But I mean, the research is what made it real, because especially for the landscape and that. The landscape is a major character in the York books, but only because I was out there so much. I mean, it's so obvious. I mean, the sky's bigger. I mean, everything is bigger. And of course, there was almost a daily opportunity to come in close contact with buffalo. I can only imagine what it was like in the 1800s when there were hundreds of thousands of them roaming the plains. And then, of course, we know that something happened to them after that. But yeah, that memory, research, and imagination. Good to see you. Other comments? Questions? Are you sufficiently depressed?
Where can we buy it? Where can we buy it? Get a book on it.
My grandson has a suitcase full. He'd be happy to sell them to you, and he gets to keep all the money. Yes, ma'am.
What do you think makes a poet a poet? In the essence of, you were talking about you're conducting a lot of research for your poetry, but what do you think distinguishes a poet's voice versus the person you may see perform at Busboys and Poets, or like, being in the DC area, you see people doing a lot of poetry all the time. What makes a voice stick out?
I'm not sure I can answer that. I think that, I don't want to say that what you hear publicly is not poetry, but I know a lot of it, particularly if it's designed for performance. There's a lot of slam poetry that is awesome and amazing because people have mastered the skills that you need for theater. You've mastered your voice, your face, your body, and you memorize the words. I mean, if you can do that, you can be on Broadway. I think it's a little bit different from the tradition Medina and I come out of, where we're married to the page, and whatever we do out loud has to happen for you even when we're not there. So we have to study the craft, and that craft of poetry is what makes it a little different, because there is some, even if it's informal, there's still form. Nikki Finney would say that it's not that she doesn't write in form, it's that every time she writes a poem, she has to invent a new form for that poem. Which is challenging sometimes because especially you're writing other people's voices. But I think the other things that make it, that separate, I say, poets and artists from people, who may not be poets and artists, is a level of sensitivity and a way of experiencing the world. People talk about the cliche of, wearing your heart on your sleeves, or but most poets are overly sensitive. I mean, we watch the news and cry, and people look at us and laugh. I had, of my 7 sisters, they would have some mean things to say about me as a kid growing up. And they would be shocked, to tell you that I found something to do with that kind of way of seeing the world. But I was a mama's boy, I admit that. And I think growing up that close to my mother's skirt and watching how she interacted with other people really rubbed off on me. And maybe if I'd grown up in my father's house, I'd had a rougher exterior. But because of that exposure, because of not having, 10 layers of steel over my heart, it's easier for me to see the world in a way that allows me to use words to respond to it. And I think that's the kind of thing that makes an artist, not necessarily just a poet. And I think I've heard some things. Patricia Smith is an amazing performance poet, and she's, kick-ass poet on the page. So I don't want to separate those two, but I think there's a level of commitment to the subject. And I always ask people who ask me about publishing and writing why they are writing in the first place. If they're writing because they want to see their name on the bookshelf, that's different from believing they have something to say. It's totally different. Because once you get your name on the bookshelf, then you'll stop. Like Medina would never retire. He can't. He's got too many opinions and things to say. When they carry him out of here, he'll be speaking poems from his bed. I'm 109. I always want to write this poem. Thank you for that question.
That was a good question.
Yes.
I appreciate what you say about craft, and it's obvious that you have committed yourself to craft, but yet you are a very good reader of your work. I mean, there is certainly a theater about your performance. So can you say a little bit about that?
Well, I think I've been to readings where I was bored out of my skull. And it was the reader's fault. I think that if people come and sit and give up an hour of their life, that you owe a level of commitment to your own work. If you believe what you're saying, then the passion comes automatically. And I think it's less about a performance and trying to put something on that doesn't really exist. It's about believing in what you say on the page, and that's what I try to do. I really mean this stuff. I'm not just saying, perform it, and then I'm going to stop and say thank you. But the things that are about the craft, you learn in speech class, about pacing, about how to tell a story, and the things that make them whole, that make them work. If imagine being in a reading and when the person gets to the end, you don't know that it's the end, right? But if you're studying craft, you always know that's because that line landed on 2 feet, like a gymnast, bam, and people respond. And if you're using the craft, you know how to manipulate the images and make sure that it's experiential, that you should never be in the audience passively experiencing the poetry reading. If you're human and it's real stuff, you're going to grieve, you're going to laugh, you're going to be mad and pissed off too. And that makes it, a communal experience for me. So I guess it's my side-eye way of challenging it was a performance. But thank you, because it's a compliment in there somewhere.
But to say it was a performance was not a slam at all. It was a compliment.
So thank you. Yes.
Can you share with the Howard community how you co-founded the Appalachian movement and what is an Appalachian poet?
Great question.
No, look it up. It's on the internet. Well, forever ago, one of the things about, you hear the word Appalachia, because you watch mass media, you may still think that Appalachia is 100% white. But what you fail to realize and what's not communicated is that inside Appalachia is, Appalachia is the home of Carter G. Woodson, who's the father of black history, right? Pittsburgh and Birmingham are in Appalachia. Nina Simone, Bill Withers, August Wilson are from Appalachia. But you never hear that when people talk about Appalachia. You hear about Barefoot, uncultured, hillbilly. But imagine if you heard all those things and Negro League baseball at the same time. That other stuff would not live at all. So mass media, you know, the movie Deliverance, some of us know that movie, has done more. People still make banjo jokes because of the power of that movie. But that movie has sold an image of Appalachia that still discredits the entire region. But, I mean, Angela Davis, Nikki Giovanni, Sonia Sanchez are Appalachian. But you never hear that, right? So when I looked up the definition of Appalachia, I think early 90s, it said white residents of the mountainous regions of Appalachia. And I said, well, what about people of color who live there? You know, what are they? And so I tried to kind of deconstruct that idea inside the poem. And at the end of the poem, I used the word Appalachia for the first time. And it's now in the Oxford American Dictionary. It's a real word. I didn't get any money for it, but the definition includes as modifier, as in Appalachian poet. So that feels like it's a check for me every time I read it. But that's all it is. It's because when people hear it, they know immediately what I'm talking about. That there's some people of color, and now people are claiming to be Cuba-Latin, Asia-Latin, Arab-Latin. But we were just trying to create a word that allowed people who were left out of the definition to claim the space they were born in. And that's it.
Nikki Giovanni claims it all the time now.
And we claim her. There's people who claim it that we feel differently about. But some crazy people out there. Yes, ma'am.
In reference to claiming things, do you identify more with being an African American poet or a poet?
I come out of tradition. The boys would say I'm three things, and you don't have to choose just one. I'm simultaneously a poet, an American poet, an African American poet, and an Afro-Latin poet, all at the same time. I can't, I wish I could be three people at the same time. I get more work done. But I don't separate them. They overlap. You good? Is there some kind of reception and free food across the hall?
Yeah, and Vito.
Well, thank you all for having made